Cool. Hey everyone, welcome to the episode of That's All Funny. My guest today is host of What's Under the Mask, a podcast looking at the psychology of dark personalities, serial killers, and con artists. Cameron Harman, how you doing today, Cameron?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for being here. No, so I was listening to your podcast, and it actually had something to do with because I live here in Texas, and it
Mm,
was the rainy street serial killer.
yes.
And that was the most recent one you had on your podcast, What's Under the Mask, the whole idea of it. Um, your podcast explores, what some might see as disturbing or humans, what do you think it draws humans to these types of personalities in media, whether it's fiction or nonfiction?
I think everybody has a dark side, and I think that people want to get as close to it without being murdered as possible. We know through books like the one I've written that people are attracted to it. People are attracted to true crime podcasts, something about it, right? And I think that it's because people want to be able to explore that world and explore the psychology of people like that without having to be at the receiving end of the people like this.
No, yeah, yeah, I've gone through it myself. What with watching TV shows like Dexter or
Right.
You, even wanting to be in the shoes of the killer's mind, and like you said, or what you're doing, like with your show or your book, get a better understanding of what goes on in these killers' minds when they do things like this, and not just killers, because you understand, con artists and just people who do dark things
Right.
for whatever reasons, their own reasons. Compelled to. Yeah, it's. I know you've gone to school for psychology. Uh,
Correct. Yeah, I'm finishing up my undergrad now, and then I'll be off to graduate school after that.
is this something you've always felt yourself compelled to like go to, even like in the younger days, or when did like the turning point start where you were like, you know what, I want to get a better understanding to this, not just um recreationally, where some people just talk about it, but actually go to school for it. Where was your
Mm.
turning point for that?
It's a good question. I've always been fascinated by why people do what they do, even as a kid. But I never thought that I would have gone down this path as far as school and going the lengths that I have to do what I've done. I would say that upon taking my first couple of psychology classes, I was hooked. And getting to be in that world, I really like the academic world. Getting to learn has always been something I've enjoyed. So being in class and learning about these things, it just really just drove it home for me. And the precursor to that was to learn about Buddhism. And Buddhism is a really fascinating concept, both spiritually and philosophically. I could not be a Buddhist. I have material things, right? Like that's how I'm talking to you on this computer right now, right? Like I like my iPhone, I like my things. So I couldn't, and I like meat. I don't see myself as a Buddhist, but I really appreciate the things that they believe. And some of what psychology understands is very closely related to psychology, understanding the mind, the ego, right? That's pretty much where Sigmund Freud really starts, is with understanding the three elements of the ego identity, the id, the ego, the superego. Anyways, once I started learning about that, and I was like, oh, this is where I found my home, because it's like this perfect idea of like understanding people's minds, not from like a spiritual perspective per se, but from a scientific perspective. But what
Mhm.
really nailed the coffin shut for me was last year getting to work as an intern for a year inside a jail, where I got to interview some inmates and be around that world. That's really what set me on this course, because I just thought that was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had.
And some people might find that fearful, for you to find that cool. Is no, it just shows that you have want to have a deeper understanding for, these ideas or these beliefs, because they are kind of ideas and beliefs when people believe or are compelled to do things that are dark or evil.
Right.
Is the side of people compelled to do good things. They're essentially the same thing. They're just obviously, for different reasons.
Yeah,
And I see, you're like you said, you were an intern in prisons. You even served in the U.S. military. Thank you for your service.
yeah. Thank you.
Um, can you how was I say? Do you believe like that these thoughts that you go through, like you've seen the prisoners, you've seen, military and what that does to people, what that turns people into, interesting, in that it might turn them into. Do you think people like can be rehabilitated with those like PTSD, or these prisoners that are put into prisons for certain crimes? Do you believe they can? Do you believe there's like redemption?
Well, there's always redemption. I think redemption and rehabilitation are different because somebody can find redemption for themselves, which a lot of times they do. But I would question and I'm skeptical of the sincerity, right? It's easy to find God once you've already been in trouble and now you're behind bars and you have a lot of repenting to do. So I could understand that. But as far as rehabilitation goes, I think for most cases, yes. But then when we start talking about individuals like Ted Bundy or Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer, I don't believe at this point, at this juncture, I don't think that there is rehabilitation for individuals like that because, especially with those two people that I just mentioned, they were in jail and were released and went back to the life that they had before
Mhm,
killing and assaulting people. And so, and the other part, which I spend a lot of time talking about in my book, is the lying. Most people like yourself and myself, we don't expect people in our day-to-day life to lie to us. At least we don't expect them to be habitual liars, which is why they have the edge over people like us and why they're able to lure people into their car, lure people to come follow them and to their own demise, because we don't expect that. That's not part of our norm. But for them, that is their personality. Their personality is that they use lying to take advantage of other people. And so when you're trying to rehabilitate or do therapy with somebody like this, you're at a disadvantage because you don't know if they're telling you the truth.
mhm. Do you think there's I know you mentioned it in your book, I'm sure you do. That about the dark personalities and all that. Is there a version of the nature versus nurture, or equal parts of both? Like, are these people's minds, who are compelled to do these things, created by their, environment, or are they just born this way? Are they born broken? You know?
Good question. And unfortunately, the answer is we don't really know because it seems in some cases uh, it is almost developed or baked, meaning that it's kind of cooked over time into a person through abuse and trauma. And then there are individuals who seem to be right out of the womb having some type of malfunction of the brain, if you will, as putting it politely as I can,
Mhm,
something or a character flaw in their personality. There's two general theories, and there's probably more, but these are the two that I like the most, which is that being a psychopath or a violent individual like this is a affect or a problem with your personality. So your personality is just basically a rigid set of beliefs that you built over time, and that develops who you are as a person. And for you and I, we developed relatively normal, so we can function in society and we can follow the law and be respectful of other people. For individuals like this, they don't have that. They somewhere along the line, that's either lost or not properly embedded into their psyche.
mhm,
Or another theory is that it's a neurological problem. So in some brain scans of psychopaths that we've seen, they show that there's kind of like a blunted or diminished connection between the prefrontal lobe and the amygdala. That's important because your prefrontal lobe is responsible for decision making and it's responsible for impulsivity, and your amygdala is responsible for your fear response. So, if there's a blunted connection there, then it would make sense why psychopathic individuals have no fear of doing the wrong thing or don't care. And not only that, but they are very impulsive and they have bad decision making skills.
mhm. No, yeah, and that's with a lot of I feel like a lot of these, like, I wouldn't say new age killers or anything, but
Mm,
they seem like they go more off of impulse and the fact that they don't think of the repercussions, like, oh, I don't know if they want to get caught or if they just
Mm.
don't care, you know.
I think it's more about not caring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely, and just kinda scratching the itch that's in their head of
Right.
wanting to do these bad things. Without telling too much about, your new book, I don't know how much, when you're gonna release and all that. On dark personalities, is, there like a recipe that we see, like a habit? I know we were talking about nature versus nurture, but is there like almost like a rhythm that we can sort of see in these would be disturbing people.
Yeah.
Whether it's like I know you just said the habitual lying, that's one of them. But are there other things that we could see and we like know? Oh, that's a disturbing person. Whether it's a con artist like you mentioned, or someone that's just wanting to do bad things against people. Do you think there's like a rhythm to it where we can
Yes.
kind of tell like, oh, that's someone that's evil?
Well, again, and I know that you're using that word evil, and it's like a generic term, but I would say more. I liked what the other word you used, which is disturbed.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it's not so much. So I've been asked this question a couple times in different podcast interviews. And what I've told people is that I don't personally believe that you could just look at somebody and know. There are some examples of that, like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. When you look at him, he's creepy. Like he gives off a vibe that he wants to kill people and hurt people, right? But that's also not an easy way to identify somebody, right? And quite frankly, it's judgmental. So I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that there's a way to look at somebody and determine this. Now, what you can determine is through their behavior. And in my book, I do discuss what that looks like when you're dating somebody, right? When you're working with somebody, if you have a boss or a coworker who is a dark personality type, right? And it probably is important to explain what the differences in dark personalities are. So there's four dark personality types that we've identified so far: Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic, and sadistic, sadism. These are four typical traits that we associate with dark personalities. A Machiavellian personality type is going to be somebody who's strategic in their method. So this, to me, this seems more fitting of like a CEO or somebody in the workplace where they don't see their coworkers or their staff as people. They see them as pawns. And so they
Hmm.
don't care about them. And so they'll treat them in a way that fits their needs. So today I might be nice to you, and maybe I brought donuts into the office because I want you all to work a little harder. But then after you've done what I've asked you to, you might ask to leave work early or maybe ask for the day off. And I say, no, you can fly a kite. Like, I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think a
Oh
great
yeah.
example, a great movie example is Christian Bale's performance in American Psycho.
Mhm.
That's a great one. That's a great example of somebody like in the CEO, Wall Street world who has this. Now, of course, it's a movie, so it's, dramatic, but, or The Wolf of Wall Street. That's another example I use. That individual is not a murderer. He's not a violent criminal, but he has no remorse and he doesn't care that he's ripping people off, and all he wants is money. He wants money and power. So that's a Machiavellian type. Psychopathic, what you would imagine. It's a psychopathic individual, no remorse, very little impulse control, and they just don't care. Like their general attitude is, I don't care. Narcissistic, the most selfish, extreme version of that is you can imagine. I'm going to lie, steal and cheat to get what I want from you, and I don't care about you. They do have feelings, but they typically are more internal with their feelings. They care about themselves, and that's a difference between a psychopathic individual and a narcissistic. Sadistic, they enjoy the pain of others, and that's either psychological pain, emotional pain, physical pain, sexual pain. They derive pleasure from that. And so those are the four characteristics of those personalities. Now, as far as identifying it, I tell people you kind of have to trust your gut. If you're at work or if you're dating somebody and something feels wrong, or your friends are telling you, like, I don't like this person. They're rude. There's something about them that I just don't like. And if it's more than one person, right? If it's not just your one friend, if it's like your collective group of friends that are
Hmm.
saying that they don't like this person, but you don't see it, that is a huge red flag. Because when we become emotionally involved with another person, we tend to skip over red flags. We tend to not look at their flaws. But our friends and our family members can see those things and be able to judge them without any confusion because there's nothing in it for them other than your safety. So I typically say trust your gut and trust the people around you. And that in the workplace, it becomes obvious. You know, when a boss is treating you poorly, it shows.
And obviously, I mean, no shoe fits everyone. There could be differences in different communities, like whether you want to choose race or gender. I'm sure there are different red flags too, right? As far as like people just act giving off that disturbing presence, as you say. I'm
Sure.
sure there are stuff like that. Uh, I was seeing here. I remember reading a story, and this isn't like a true story, but I was just going to get your take on it. A fictional story about a man that is so nice to everyone that he can't sleep or eat.
Hmm.
He worries about homeless people. He worries about the troubles of the world, and it makes him physically ill. Do you think that would be under sort? And this is a fictional story, but kind of
Right.
under that same category as if a person you have a person that's disturbing, that's doing disturbing things that could be considered quote unquote evil in society. How would you feel about a person that is too nice, that is doing so much good, but that it's actually affecting them in a negative way and making them sick? Is that
Hmm.
would that fit under the same umbrella if a person was like too good of a person?
So listening to what you just described, I think about this in two ways. If the person is truly genuine about their feelings and it is causing them this kind of discomfort, that seems more of like a mental illness, something along the lines of like obsessive compulsive disorder. And I wouldn't characterize that as a dark personality. Now, somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder could also have a dark personality, most certainly. But if this person is just overly concerned with other people to the point where it's affecting them, that's not something I would put in this category. Now, on the back end of that, if this person is not truly genuine, if they are too nice, but then every now and then you see behind the mask where they're actually quite mean or they're describing somebody as, for example, I call this double speak or I call it the chameleon effect. Narcissists have this ability to be very charming, psychopaths too. They have this ability to be extremely charming, talk their way into anything or talk their way out of anything. And so today they might appear to you as overly nice and right. And you can tell, right? Nobody is happy and nice all of the time. We're
Mhm.
just not.
Yeah.
It's not how people work. We have a wide range of emotions. And so anybody displaying that, I would automatically be suspect of because that's not right. Now, it could be like we talked about, could be they have some type of underlying mental illness that causes this or is part of this. But also, it could be somebody that is narcissistic or psychopathic and this is just an overcorrection for something they don't have. So this
Mm.
is one way that narcissists and psychopaths, because they don't have feelings for other people the same way that we do, and for psychopaths they don't have compassion or empathy, they have to fake it. And if they're smart enough, if they have a high IQ, they will learn from other people what it looks like, and so they'll try to replicate it by pretending. And sometimes that comes off as overly nice or too nice.
No, yeah, yeah, it's weird that we can probably sense that easier than a disturbing person when someone is just being too nice. But I guess that just depends on the individual and the community around it. I know I was listening to your podcast, uh, What's Under the Mask, and you had where you checked out some Reddits of some strange or disturbing maybe individuals. What's the strangest story you've encountered on there, as far as it doesn't even have to be with disturbing individuals, true crime, anything like that, what's the one that got you like, I don't know about this. This is a little too
Hmm.
For a Reddit post, you know?
Probably the one, if you listened to my last episode, which was the Rainy Street Ripper, that story was probably the most wild. And I even addressed it at the beginning of the episode. I talked about that it was kind of wild because it was the a young man talking about this ex-girlfriend he had that was stalking him, and apparently somebody went to her house. She was paying somebody to mess with this guy, and whenever the dude went over to her house to collect the payment, her house was in disarray. She walked and talked like a demon. And so the guy's post on Reddit was something like, I don't think my ex-girlfriend is human, or something to that effect. And I thought it was kind of silly, but I picked it because there's elements in the story that do resemble stalking, do resemble the dark personality. And I I say in the podcast, I can't speak to the paranormal elements of this story, but as far as the stalking is concerned, yeah, this is on par with the dark personality.
And I was gonna ask with that, do you think I know you're saying you can't speak to it, maybe you're not an expert, or you just don't believe in it because it's something a little far fetched. But do you think there's like an evil sort of hell demon like presence in some of these people? Like, do you think there's otherworldly things afoot? Can you rule that out, or are you like with school, the education? You're like, nope, that's not anything we consider at all.
Well, certainly in academics, we don't consider that, but I am more open-minded than most people. I think that we need to listen to individuals when they tell us things. I mean, it doesn't matter if they're lying. Sometimes we can find information out through the lies. What I do find disturbing is that in several instances of serial killers and violent offenders, they do talk about hearing demonic voices in their heads. Um, Nicholas Cruz, Parkland school shooter, I wrote about him in my book. He talked about having voices in his head. Now, what I will say, this is often a tactic by offenders to get some kind of special treatment to, make it. They seem to think that this will get them some kind of lesser sentence, but this is usually, and I'm trying not to be mean, but this is kind of an uneducated thing to assume because
Hmm.
forensic psychologists now do have techniques to determine whether it's called malingering, whenever somebody's faking a story like that or creating some type of um, issue to get them a lesser sentence or to get them in less trouble. It's called malingering, and we have ways of determining that now. And in Nicholas Cruz, in my opinion, I watched a 3 hour long interview with him when he was first arrested, and he was talking to the one of the detectives that was questioning him. And he talks about the voices in his head, and the detective is not buying the story. Once it is determined that the detective is not going to buy the story about the demon voices in his head, Nicholas Cruz immediately asked to speak to a psychologist. Now, me being armchair quarterback watching this play out, to
Hmm.
me, this is obvious that he's just trying to get attention. The detective is not buying the story. Cruz recognizes that nobody is going to believe this except for maybe a psychologist. But this is also a miscalculated move because a psychologist is somebody who's trained for this kind of thing, and they're not going to be easily swayed by these kinds of stories. They will be able to determine that this is malingering.
No, that's yeah. It sounds like that's just a what insanity, right? They try
Right.
to get off on like a lesser charge. Um, But then again, we can't rule out, I guess, if you want to be open to everything, you can't rule out because these seem to be the trends, and who knows who started that trend of, oh, I hear voices in my head. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
No, I agree.
I'm
And
sure
like
we
I
could.
said, I'm open-minded. I I don't discredit anything. I think if somebody's telling us something, then we should investigate it. Because it's like even if maybe they are real, demons, and maybe they are real. But for me, I'm more interested. Like, why are they using that?
Mhm,
What to them is it because they're religiously inclined and they don't have a better way to explain what's happening to them? Um, or
mhm.
are they using it to try and get out of trouble? Or do they really believe this? And I think either way, we should listen to what people are saying to us, and that can help us maybe try to understand what's happening.
No, it's so true. You can't rule out that could be just them explaining it to themselves rather than it actually being the truth, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know how much you can tell us about your book that's about to come out, but what do you plan to do with your book? And I don't know if you have a title yet for it. Um, do you plan for it to educate us? Do you plan for it to strike fear into us or entertain us with how people nowadays are interested in that, you know, disturbing? Because it is sort of a form of like we've talked about, a form of entertainment. What do you plan on it helping? I guess the world or putting out to the world, education, entertainment, or fear. You know.
Yeah. So the name of the book is called What's Under the Mask, and it'll be released. It's in the works right now. I imagine it'll be out for available on Amazon in probably 2 weeks or so, maybe a little bit more. But that's typically the time frame. So it'll be out soon. And what I'm hoping that people take away from this book is just to I want it to be educational. I want it to be entertaining. I hope it doesn't scare anybody because what one thing I try to mention in the book a couple times is that when you're reading these stories, I don't want people to stop trusting other people because dark personalities, there's not as many as people think. The amount in the at least in the United States is it's ranging anywhere from 2 to 4% of our population. The chances are you will meet somebody like this, but that doesn't mean that you're going to meet an Edmund Kemper or a Ted Bundy, right? You might meet somebody that I've talked about in these Reddit stories. I talked about one today. I just recorded an episode not too long ago, and it's not as serious of a story, but it's the story of a stalker, somebody who was following this woman around for 9 years. Every time she had a social media account or post, this person was there to make comments about it. He even found out where she worked and went to this place to volunteer there. Now, he didn't hurt her, he didn't assault her, he didn't do anything, but he did charm his way into this environment to the point where she felt so uncomfortable she needed to leave her job because all of her friends and coworkers and stuff, they're buying this guy's story, and all he's doing is attempting to get close to her. Again, there are individuals like that too. It's not always going to be the violent serial killers, and then shit, there's people who are CEOs that are running companies that are taking advantage of their employees, taking advantage of your money.
But there's also that line in the sand where, people reach it and it's like, well, how do you know they don't want to, oh, I'm stalking, I'm kind of liking this. Why don't I try a little further and
Correct.
break into their home? Oh, I broke in. That was easy. Why don't I try? So that it's always I don't know. I'm not saying people are um gonna instinctively do that, of course. Maybe someone's comfortable in the disturbed with just stalking, but there's always that line in the sand that's pretty easy to cross once you get to it.
Certainly. And not only that, to be clear, this is uncomfortable for this woman. She quit her job.
Oh yeah.
That's not a great thing, right? But what I'm hoping is that this will educate people about what individuals like this are. And I kind of give some tips in the book, like I talk about in the section about working with a dark personality. There are things you can do. You don't have to put up with this isn't the 1950s. You don't have to put up with abuse from your employer or from other coworkers. If somebody is a narcissist or a psychopath working with you and they are making your life miserable, you need to document what's going on. You need to report it to the HR systems. There are things in place now that can help you, and they will either move you to another spot or if you can't get away, then it is time to find a new job. But at least what I'm hoping is that this gives people an idea of what they can do and what options they have if dealing with somebody like this.
No, that's a great guide, in order to help people because a lot of people, yeah, will just turn to Reddit, and Reddit's, I mean, it's a community, but it's not the best community out there, and it's good to
Right.
have, published work or work online from experts such as yourself to tell people, hey, this is this is fact. This is how I believe it should be handled. This should be guided this way. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's good. It's good to have, and then like you said, for some people who just like scratching that itch of I don't know, dark entertainment from dark personalities. It's always an entertaining read of these stories, you know. So it's a lot of double edged swords, or I don't know, catch 22s. I don't know what you want to call it, but uh, so that comes out soon. What's under the mask?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and then you have your podcast titled the same thing, What's Under the Mask, and that you do that weekly.
Yes, weekly. And tomorrow will be the release of a continuation of last week's episode. So last week was talking about the Rainy Street Ripper from Austin, Texas. Tomorrow's episode is a connection of that called the Smiley Face Killer Connection. And it is believed that there's a theory about the smiley face killers. And for me personally, I believe that these could be connected. And when you look at the evidence, it does appear this way.
Oh, that's interesting. Though, and yeah, I had been following that Rainy Street Killer because a lot of it seemed like it wasn't just one killer; it was a lot of different killings, but they just happened to all wash up into that same end river or something. So
Hmm.
that'd be interesting to hear. And yeah, this episode will come out tomorrow. So it'll come out around the same time of your show. And yeah, no, anything else you want to push? Because I know, like I said, your What's Under the Mask podcast is very entertaining. As far as if you want that entertainment of the disturbed people, but it is entertaining to listen to and informative. And I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to push before we end today.
No, just for your listeners, if any of you have a story that you'd like to have aired on my podcast about a dark personality you've encountered, being a narcissist or psychopath, somebody you've dated, a parent, or somebody you've worked with, shoot me an email at wutmpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear your stories.
Well, awesome. Then I hope anyone takes you up on that. I'm sure a lot of people will have their own, stories of dark personalities in their lives. I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you nothing but success for your book coming out, What's Under the Mask, and then for your podcast too of the same name. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see y'all later. Take care. Bye, guys.